SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. What if your luck wanes and you do find yourself with a storm approaching you? Where do you go? What do you do? Listen to what veteran storm survivors emphasize. Learn possible boat-saving strategies and especially witness what it's actually like to be one of 1,200 boats during a Category 4 hurricane as the winds build up to 130 knots. Just seeing the video footage we took of Hurricane Luis, one of 19 named storms of the 1995 hurricane season, is an experience worth watching. So we hope you enjoy this part of the episode. And to relieve the stress of surviving tropical storms, we lighten the episode with topics like insurance. Is it worth it? Fishing. Is it worth it? And end with something always worth it, a cold sundowner at the end of the day. So enjoy this episode. Hey there! Ever since we asked for members who had survived tropical cyclones or severe storms to contact us, we know you have been anxiously anticipating this moment. Amazingly, no one has been through hurricanes but 3 boats. All the rest have apparently been lucky enough to dodge storms until now. Good on you! Dave McCampbell is a real veteran survivor of tropical revolving storms. He's weathered over a dozen. Let's listen as he gives us some background info on storms and some things to know about them.
We are currently on a mooring in Port Carmen on Cebu Island in the central Philippines. It's October now, and it is typhoon season here. As a matter of fact, there are a couple headed our way right now, and also a tropical depression passed south of us just yesterday. I think most of you are already aware that a tropical cyclone is a generic term for tropical revolving storms with winds of 65 knots or greater. And these storms include storms from different regions of the world, such as hurricanes, which are in the Atlantic, Caribbean, and the eastern North Pacific, typhoons, which are in the western North Pacific, cyclones in the southwest Pacific and parts of the Indian Ocean, and willy-willies, which are in the rest of the Indian Ocean. Lesser revolving tropical storm with wind speeds between 33 and 64 knots are called tropical depressions. Also, we should all know that a knot is 15% greater than a mile per hour. So 100 knots equals 115 miles per hour. As of last month, I've been through 13 tropical cyclones, some because of where I lived and worked for 14 years in Florida Keys, and some just plain bad luck. Interestingly, Soggy Paws recently was in a Cat 1 typhoon in the Visayas, which is in the middle Philippines, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The most effective avoidance advice for most boaters might be just to stay out of the tropical cyclone-prone areas during their season. The Northern Hemisphere season is June through November. The Southern Hemisphere is the opposite of that. And in the Western North Pacific, it's all year, but more storms occur in the summer. Obviously, not every boater can do this. The next best advice is, if a big one approaches, just change your latitude. Generally, tropical cyclones move west because of the Earth's rotation and eventually curve away from the equator. So if one is approaching you from the east in the northern hemisphere, go south. If you're in the southern hemisphere, go north. both are toward the equator. There's lots more detail on the internet or on our Surviving Big Storms in Port PowerPoint presentation on our website. Now, here are some historical facts that I've found very interesting. First, the average tropical cyclones per year by regions on Earth. In the Atlantic and Caribbean, 11 hurricanes a year. In the Northeast Pacific, 15 hurricanes a year. In the Northwest Pacific, 26 typhoons a year. Southwest Pacific, 9 cyclones. Northwest Australia, 9 cyclones. North Indian Ocean, only 5 cyclones per year. And in the Southwest Indian Ocean, 9 cyclones per year. And occasionally there's a tropical cyclone in the Mediterranean, and I've seen one in the South Atlantic, but those are pretty rare. The strongest documented sustained wind tropical cyclone, and that's wind speed staying the same, the maximum, over a couple of minutes. Depending on where you are in the world, they have different ways of determining that, but does not include gusts. So this is strongest sustained tropical cyclone wind speeds on Earth. The winner is Hurricane Patricia, 2015 in western Mexico, 200 miles per hour. That's 174 knots sustained, with a central pressure of 879 millibars. Hurricane Allen in the Gulf of Mexico in 1980 had a sustained wind speed of 189 miles per hour. And the 1935 Labor Day storm in the Florida Keys, the estimate was 184, but it could very well have been more than that because the wind meter broke at that speed. Also, Hurricane Gilbert 1988 and Wilma 2005, and several super typhoons and cyclones at about that same speed. The lowest central pressure was Typhoon Tip in the Northwest Pacific in 1979, 870 millibars. That's really, really low. The first named storm was Typhoon Cobra in December of 1944, 2 months after the World War II Leyte Philippine Island invasion, and 3 U.S. Navy ships capsized and sunk during that storm. There was major carrier damage, U.S. carrier damage, and 800 sailors were thrown into the water and drowned or killed waiting for rescue. We lost more planes in that typhoon than in any World War II battle. And if you're interested in reading more about this, there's a great book called Halsey's Typhoon that's well worth a read.
Okay, before Dave continues, let's check in with Rudy Sachet, another veteran survivor of storms. We'd like to pick your brain a little and ask you some questions. First question, what should we think about way ahead of ever being in a storm?
I'd like to start by mentioning something that many folks don't think about until it's too late, even those who have been through it before. Gear for hurricane-force conditions is seldom found on shelves. It must be ordered in, and this takes time. And what is on the shelves goes quickly. This is not the time for wishful thinking. My advice is to get big gear and get it months before it's needed, and if it turns out not to be used, be grateful.
Okay, and how do we prepare for that storm?
The power of hurricane-force winds is difficult to envision while the weather is still pleasant. Nonetheless, it's important to make the necessary preparations early, as it becomes difficult as the wind picks up, eventually being impossible. Here are a few suggestions. Get everything possible below and lash down the remaining items. Sails and canvas must come off and be taken below. No excuses. Secure all halyards away from the masts. Hatches and other potential leaks should be covered or sealed against wind-blown rain. And many boats sink because of clogged scuppers. Keep yours clean. If in a slip, secure the boat against high winds, heavy seas, rising water, and the lines against chafe. Anchors are impossible to get out safely in winds of any magnitude. Do so before the wind gets up. And once the wind gets up, lines can't be shortened, and trying to let out a line runs the risk of a runaway line or an injury. And keep in mind that water can be blown in, blown out, or do both. It all depends on which way the wind is blowing as the hurricane passes by. Insured or not, don't be the one responsible for letting your boat damage or injure others.
Where should one go to weather the storm? What do you recommend?
This is a great thought-provoking question. Many marinas get damaged and even destroyed, as do the boats in them. The more exposed to the wind, seas, or surge, and the greater the chances for damage. Hauling the boat sounds good, but it isn't risk-free either. Yards fill fast, and many boats that are hauled out are poorly supported. Boats get damaged when they fall over or are fallen onto, and damaged boats often fill with rain or water from the surge. Moorings are often poorly sized or poorly maintained for hurricane winds, and mooring fields usually lack the room for lines long enough to adequately handle the wind and seas. For us, anchoring has always been the best choice.
What do you do when you know there's an approaching storm?
We prefer to anchor 2 days ahead of the storm. This gives us time to pick a spot, arrange our anchors, prep the boat, and we're ready should conditions deteriorate early. Good protection from the seas is a good choice, as this significantly reduces the load on the ground tackle. But this is also where other boaters choose to anchor their boats, many of which will drag or break free. The locations that we prefer have few or no boats. These locations are usually more exposed, requiring heftier gear, but there is less risk of being hit or carried away by another boat. Isolated areas may seem ideal, but they must be balanced against not being able to readily get help if needed. And the abrupt 180-degree wind shift that occurs when the eye passes over increases the odds that the anchors may pull out. So if possible, we stay away from where the eye may pass.
So if we've decided to anchor, what are all the things that we need to think about?
Since we can't always be certain of always getting the best place to anchor, we outfit just in case we have to anchor in the worst. Manufacturer's charts are for mild weather. For storm force winds, go up at least 2 sizes, and for hurricanes, go up at least 3. For soft bottoms, go up an additional size. Design is also important. For sand and mud, any general purpose anchor will work, sized as just mentioned. For weeds, grass, and leaves, the only reliable anchor is a fisherman anchor. For storms, these anchors are sized at 2 pounds per foot of boat length, and for a category 1, 2, or 3 hurricane, 3 pounds per foot of boat length. Fisherman-style anchors will also hold in sand, mud, and rocks if sized as just mentioned. Luke or Kingston anchors are a great design, as they are easier to carry or stow, being 3-piece take-apart anchors. For category 4 or 5 hurricane, go up at least 1 more size than that just mentioned. Large anchors are cumbersome and in some ways needed to get them off and then back on board. These arrangements must be made long before needing to do so. Scopes of 10 to 1 are mandatory for storms and hurricanes. To calculate scope, add together depth of water, height of any additional tide, the height to the bow roller, the depth the anchor will bury, which is often 15 feet or more in soft bottoms, the height of a storm surge, which has been up to 25 feet in places, and the height of waves, often 5 to 6 feet even in protected anchorages. If you're uncertain of any of these measurements, add more, use scopes of 15 to 1, or do both. The do's and don'ts of tandem anchoring is included in the book Anchoring a Ground Tackler's Apprentice. Doing it wrong increases the odds that something will go wrong. Let's talk about chain, rope, shackles, and a few other items. All these items are sized based on the highest load that will occur on the ground tackle. These loads can be found in the book Anchoring a Ground Tackler's Apprentice, as well on the website trawlertrainingabc.com. Chain and shackles must have a workload limit equal to or greater than the highest load. High-test chain must use high-strength alloy shackles, and they too must have a workload limit that's equal to or greater than the highest load. These high-strength alloy shackles, they're available online from chain retailers and sometimes locally from industrial supply houses, even the occasional chandlery. Rope roads and dock lines should have a tensile strength at least 8 times the highest load. If they're going to cushion surge loads, be made of 3-strand, 8-plate, or 12-braid nylon. Lines sized like this will have plenty of stretch even in lighter winds, better chafe resistance, and retain that all-important reserve stretch necessary to cushion surge loads. Cleats should have backing plates and be through-bolted. Their length should be 12 times the diameter of the largest line and 16 times for 2 lines. Samson posts should have a diameter 3 times the diameter of the largest line used on it. Swivels should have a workload limit well above that of the highest load and only be attached to an anchor with a shackle. If the workload limit is inadequate or is attached directly to an anchor, remove it. Snubbers should be used on both rope and chain roads. On rope roads, as long as the road lays slack, the snubber will chafe, not the road. Snubber's stretch is calculated by multiplying its length by the percent of stretch. If it's also intended to cushion surge loads, it should have a tensile strength at least 8 times the load. Use 3-strand, 8-braid, or 12-braid nylon, and for hurricanes be at least 60 feet long. For a bridle, in addition to that above, the throat angle should not exceed 30 degrees and less is much healthier. And finally, hardy anti-chafe techniques are a must, and you can find over 40 ideas in the book Anchoring a Ground Tackler's Apprentice.
Thank you, Rudy, for taking all the time to share with us your great ideas. You've given some great advice, and I'm sure people have learned a lot of stuff and know things to think about.
Thank you, Jackie, for having me. Listeners with questions can always email me at rudysachet@gmail.com.
Okay, now let's go back and touch bases with Dave and see some of his suggestions of how to prepare for storms.
So next we're going to look at what to do if a tropical cyclone is approaching you. The first thing that I would do is find a good internet source for storm information. You really need to monitor the forecast path and the strength of the storm as it approaches. And the NOAA VHF weather is just not good enough. I've been in the Florida Keys for a number of storms, and I was really disappointed by the VHF weather reports that I got. If there's no internet, or you can't get a good internet connection, use the Hurricane HF Hurricane Watch net. It's on 14.3250 megahertz upper sideband, and it's also on 7.2680 megahertz lower sideband if you're in the US or Caribbean during a storm. Or use a friend with a VHF relay from ashore so he can listen to the internet up until when the storm hits, or maybe he's from a little ways away and won't be affected as much and can relay to you via VHF what's going on. In the Pacific and Indian Ocean, you're just going to have to find an HF net that can help you. So after that, the normal preparations usually include things like loading provisions, topping off fuel and water, preparing the boat, clearing the decks of all the canvas, especially storing your roller furler jibs below. They just won't hold up, even though it looks like they might if you wrap the sheets around them. I've seen so many of those come apart, and that's a real disaster. So take the roller furling jibs down below. And finally, take a look at your solar panels and large canvas like biminis and make sure that's well secured, or if you can take it down below, do that. And the final thing would be to have a bailout plan in case things go really bad. You want to be able to get away from the boat if you have to. So for monitoring the storm track, what you want to know is what's the forward speed of the storm, what's the expected wind speed and direction in your area, and what's the estimated time of arrival of the storm. One of the things that you need to be very careful of is rapid intensification, and that's a pretty common thing in warm water situations. If the approach is mainly over warm water of 83 degrees Fahrenheit or more, and there's little vertical wind shear, be concerned. Normally the forecasters will tell you that, and that there's a possibility of rapid intensification. A good example of that was Hurricane Ida just last year, approaching New Orleans, intensified by 65 knots in 24 hours. And it went from a Cat 1 to a Cat 4 in less than 24 hours. So Cat 1 you could probably survive in your boat, maybe even in a marina. Cat 4, no way. Another thing to be concerned about is where the storm center is. And you can determine that by using a law, Bayes-Ballett's law, to find the storm center during the approach, and if the storm is going to pass north or south of you or over you. So in the northern hemisphere, what you do is face the wind, and the storm center is going to be about 110 degrees clockwise or to the right. The opposite would be true in the southern hemisphere. If the steady wind direction, if the wind direction is steady, the storm center is going to pass right over the top of you. So why does this make a difference? Well, because there's a significant difference between the side of the storm that you might be on, whether you're in the dangerous or less dangerous semicircle. And if you're in the northern hemisphere and you face the storm center coming at you, the dangerous side is on the left. Opposite, of course, in the southern hemisphere. And there's a lot more detail on this in the internet, but it can make a significant difference in wind speed. And storm surge, the thing that has killed more people in tropical cyclones than any other thing, is a huge problem if there's no outlet for the water ahead of the storm. So if it's coming into a big bay like Mobile Bay or New York, where there's no way for the water to get out, it can be a real killer. For instance, in Hurricane Katrina, which was a Cat 4 storm approaching New Orleans, the storm surge was 28 feet. 28 feet. That's almost the height of a 3-story building. In Opal, which was only a Cat 3 coming into Pensacola, Florida, it was 24 feet. Camille, a Cat 5 in Mississippi, 24 feet. And it should be obvious to anyone that a boat in a marina or in a low boat yard just can't deal with a 25-foot storm surge. You just really need to go someplace else. And there's many, many examples of this on the internet, photos of totally destroyed marinas and boat yards. And also we have picked a couple off and put them on our presentation. So finally, I would say my advice would be, if you're going to be in a strong Cat 3 or above, that's 125 miles an hour, 110 knots, after you complete your boat preps, plan to get off the boat. It's just too dangerous with flying objects, and you really can't do a whole lot to help if there's a problem on the boat. So next we're going to talk about where to go and where not to go and why. First up, if you're in a marina and you're expecting a strong Cat 3 or above and the storm surge over about 10 feet, it's probably best that you get out and go somewhere else. I was in Boca Chica Marina in the Florida Keys for Hurricane Wilma in 2005. It passed about 60 nautical miles north of us as only a Cat 2. The docks in the marina were non-floating. That is, they were tied with concrete pilings to the bottom of the marina and ashore. I was there a couple of days in advance, and I left and survived in a mangrove pond a little further away with no damage. At the marina, 20 of the 60 boats that were there were sunk, that is, on the bottom, and there was lots of damage to other boats and to the marina. And if you are not sure about this, take a look on the internet at the many marina disasters. But again, from mainly strong storms with big storm surges. If you're in a boatyard, check the ground height above sea level and make sure that it's greater than what the expected storm surge is going to be. So if your boat is in a boatyard that has only a 10-foot height above high tide, and the storm surge is expected to be 15 or 20 feet, then that's not a good situation. And also, if the beam of your boat or others in a line are going to be exposed to the highest winds, that's going to be a problem because of the domino effect of one boat falling over and knocking the next one and the next one and the next one and so on. So if you can't get underway, what I'd recommend you do is have a good look at and strengthen the jack stands. Use chain to go from one to the other across underneath the boat to hold them together so that they won't get kicked out by the wind. And minimize the boat's windage as best you can. Again, get the roller furler, jib down, and get rid of all your canvas. And you might even consider tying the mast top to the ground using your main halyard. When I was in the 3D boatyard in the Florida Keys for Hurricane Rita that passed south as a Cat 2, I knew the wind was going to be on the beam, so we used an extended halyard to pad eyes on the ground to keep the boats from falling over. If you're on a mooring, ask about the mooring's design strength, and you might even want to dive or have a diver take a look at the components of the mooring to make sure everything's in good shape and nothing's worn. And then take a look at the other boats that are around you. Make sure that their connections to the moorings are safe and have plenty of strength. Boot Key Harbor has moorings designed, that's in the Florida Keys, has moorings designed for a 50-foot boat in 120 knots of wind. Those are pretty strong moorings, and they are well maintained. But most boats' connections to the moorings were a big problem in Hurricane Irma. All but about 20 of 150 boats were sunk or blown off the moorings. And that was a Cat 4 storm, I believe, when it hit the Keys. So there was a lot of wind there, and some boats were not very well protected. All boats that were in the nearby Whiskey Creek mangroves, which is like a quarter-mile away, survived, and there was about 10 boats in there. And if you want to take a look at this, have a look on the internet at Irma Marathon Boot Key Mooring Field. Just Google that and take a look. It's pretty interesting. If you're in an anchorage that's exposed with lots of other boats, or the storm coming towards you is a Cat 3 or above, leave and find a better shelter. It's just too dangerous to be in a situation like that where you're exposed to a Cat 3 storm. The best shelter, I think, and a lot of other people also that have experienced big storms, is up a mangrove creek, where you can tie multiple lines to tall, old-growth mangroves, and the wind and sea conditions just can't get to you. And there's probably not going to be too many other boats up there, at least not right next to you, where they can cause you a problem. The best example of this, I think, the best place I've ever seen for mangrove creeks is Little Shark River in southwest Florida in the Everglades. There's over 40 miles of navigable creeks there with 50-foot tall mature mangroves. And I know for a fact that Hurricane Andrew and Wilma made direct hits there, not as Cat 4 or 5, but still direct hits right over the top. But all boats that were there survived. I've been there 3 times for hurricanes when I was in the Keys, and the biggest problem that we had was the mosquitoes. But if you've got good screens, that's not really a big deal. One other thing that might be worth considering is an enclosed residential lagoon where wind and sea conditions can't get to you. The problem with this is that if the nearby homes are not well constructed, they could be a problem with flying debris and maybe even flying roofs. But the other thing you need to be concerned about is that you're not going to get a big storm surge, because storm surge will come right into a lagoon or a canal like that. So Hurricane Katrina coming into New Orleans caused a lot of damage in boats that were in canals and residential lagoons because of the storm surge and roof damage. One other piece of advice I might offer is that whenever you anchor like you might get up to 60 knots of wind that night, normally, because that's the most you might ever see in an unforecast high wind event. I've seen that 3 times in 25 years ahead of strong cold fronts. So anchor every night like you might get up to 60 knots of wind. And how do you do that? Well, a couple things you can do. One is use the biggest modern scoop anchor, like a Rockna or some of the others that you can get on the boat. Use good, strong ground tackle with no weak links. Make sure that your anchor penetrates the bottom well and that you've got a good bottom that you can get your anchor well into, and pull hard on the anchor before you secure it for the night. So bottom line, lots of other boats nearby, big storm surge or Cat 3 or above, best to move your boat to a better protected location.
Okay, thanks Dave for some important advice. We definitely want to improve our chances to survive every way that we can. We on Sloopmoosh have also weathered a few storms successfully, and we'd like to comment on the actual experience of being in a storm. Including 11 cyclone seasons in the cyclone zone in the Pacific, we encountered 3 named storms, which were each quite different from the other. In 1995, we were in St. Martin's during Hurricane Luis as captains aboard a 110-foot aluminum live-aboard dive boat. During the hurricane, we were in the wall of the eye, the area of the strongest winds. The winds turned 360 degrees. And gusts were recorded over 150 knots. 1,200 boats were in Simpson Bay Lagoon before the storm came, and only 200 were left afloat after the storm had passed. I think we were very lucky to find out what it's like to live through a Category 4 hurricane on a big metal motor vessel, because we never felt in danger and we didn't feel afraid. And as you can see from the footage, we got a good idea of what a giant hurricane is like. The second storm was on our trimaran Sloopmoosh in 2003 or 4 with Cyclone Heta in American Samoa in Pago Pago Harbor. And because of the high mountains surrounding the harbor, even though the winds outside were 150 knots, we only got maximum of 65 knots sustained, with a few gusts of over 70, and seas no bigger than 1 or 2 feet. One boat broke its mooring, floated away, and gently just grounded a few feet from the rocks. The third storm in Vanuatu in 2006 or 7 was really a non-event. We kept dismantling stuff as forecasts of the 70-knot winds kept predicting that the path was going straight for us. And finally, when everything was kind of stowed away, we got a gust of 35 and said, uh-oh, Here it comes, it's starting. So we went to the radio and wrote down the position they gave us and found out it had already passed us 50 miles away, and that was the most wind we'll ever get. So you see, you never know with hurricanes or cyclones or storms. So the best, as the saying goes, you prepare for the worst and you hope for the best. So Luke, what is your recommendations?
Well, I think if you choose to cruise in areas susceptible to be hit by cyclones, hurricanes or typhoons, here are my recommendations. First of all, check out in advance where you will go if such a storm was coming your way. Check the depth, the protection from the ocean waves, the space available, where to tie or to make mooring, find out how many local boats may go there when there is a storm, and so sometimes it's better when you are a little bit away from big cities. Second, keep a daily watch on the weather bulletin.
Right. Nowadays, with computer tracking and everything, we have really good predictions of the tracking of the storms before they arrive. But one thing that we noted is that once the storm gets there, or the storm is like 400 miles away or something, you never get any more bulletins, and when the storm is upon you, you never get any more information, and you never find out where you are in relation to the eye of the storm. So that's one thing to be sure that you are prepared.
Number 3, have a plan to trim any windage like bimini, sails, other loose items on deck.
As I say, realize that at the height of the storm, you might not be able to move on the deck to adjust anything or try to save something or do something on deck. So it's better to over-prepare. And we found that having dive masks that have been treated with Rain-X so that the water beads off easily so you can still see are probably an essential thing to have.
Number 4, plan to stay aboard during the storm to be able to protect your lines from chafings, to fend off any drifting debris, sometimes big trees or partially awash wrecks, or other boats ready to collide with you. Also to protect your boat from looting should you drag and end up ashore. And number 5, having proper insurance coverage covering you for such storms is also an ace in the hole if all your preparation failed. So a few observations from the several heavy storms that we live and experience when we are at anchor is that first, the biggest problem is the waves action lifting your boat violently and breaking anchor chain that is too tight. If your anchor chain doesn't have enough slack, it's too rigid and it will just kind of explode, break. And also chafing on your lines.
Okay, I think a lot of people don't realize how big a problem chafe is. I think chafe is the major thing to worry about. You have to protect them with hoses and long pieces of hoses, because as we saw on the Hurricane Luis, the lines can stretch incredibly, like even 5 to 10 feet in length. And try to put hoses that are solid, not split down the long side, because the split hoses will keep, when the storm is working, the split hoses will work their way out of the hose, and then your lines will just be rubbing and chafing on metal again. And if you can, even a better idea is to put one hose inside of the rope in a hose and that hose inside of another, so that the hoses slide on each other and lessen the chafe. And one thing, we don't know whether other people do this or not, but it's an idea that we came up with when we were preparing for a hurricane, and that is to increase the elasticity and shock absorbing factor from the gusts. What we did is we tied long fenders longwise to the cleats, really close to the cleats, and led the lines over the fenders so that you had kind of a cushioning effect, shock absorbing effect, as the line straightened up and mashed the fenders down, and then when the gusts let up, the fenders would pop back into place. So, okay, you may lose or pop or saw through some of your fenders, but it's better than to lose your boat and chafe your lines.
So we also find out that windage is not so much a problem if you take all your sails inside and make your deck as bare as possible.
Okay, one thing that I found was very surprising to me when we were in Hurricane Luis was how the winds are not steady, but they're super gusty. They can gust. You'll have a kind of a calm thing and then a huge gust, and your lines and all your gear that are holding your boat will be severely tested to the max during the storm. And the other thing, people think, oh, okay, the boat's going to face the wind. Well, the truth is that we saw the boats never stay facing into the wind because of the gusts, and also because as the wind approaches and then kind of lets up, the bow will go to one side or the other, and then the wind will hit it on the side. And so the boat is always getting blown from side to side. Again, stretching and chafing and all that stuff is going to be very severe on your lines.
Then we found out also it's much better to secure your dinghy aboard, well secure it on board. Never leave it just in the water, tied even with 2 ropes behind your boat, even if you fill it with water, thinking the weight of the water will keep it in the water. We saw some dinghy just kind of like being lifted by the wind out of the water and start to turn around and around the line until the line breaks, and then they just kind of fly, away from your boat and you lose your dinghy. Also, marinas might be the worst places to be unless the docks and the other boats are really well secured. And marinas can be also death traps if ocean waves can roll in, and then all the strain on the docks, on the dock piling and everything. And when one dock get loose, all the boats on that dock drag the dock to another dock and other boats. So marina can be really the worst place. Also, you have to find out if you are in a marina, make sure the marina doesn't kick you out of the marina at the last minute when there's a storm. Many marinas have in their contract that in case of bad storm, all the boats have to evacuate. So again, if you plan before and you know where to go, maybe you even make a mooring there in advance, or you arrange with someone who has a mooring, it's maybe not a big issue. But if you have nothing prepared, thinking you will be safe in the marina, and then you have to get out, then it's not the best situation to be in. Then, much better than a marina, we prefer a well-protected anchorage, much better than going at sea. Some boats going at sea or whatever, they will be better and everything. I don't think so. And the thing is, if you are in a protected anchorage, at the worst, should you sink, it's much shorter to swim to get ashore and be safe, and also much easier to recover your boat if your boat sink, because it will be in shallow water. So I would say as a conclusion, we find out that cyclone seasons are many times the best cruising condition as far as weather go, and also uncrowded anchorages, because most other yachts are in other places supposedly secure during cyclone season. But keep in mind that if you are not prepared, it also can be your worst nightmare.
Wow! So as you can see, preparing for a hurricane, cyclone, or typhoon is no small thing. We hope you never experience a direct hit, except maybe as we did, and that you took away many ideas about how you would prepare for a storm if it ever came at you. Luke mentioned insurance when thinking about tropical storms. So many times we meet cruisers who say, "We can't afford to insure the boat." Well, let's hear from Karsten from Capri of his thoughts on whether it's worth it or not.
When he said, well, boat insurance, if you're going to have it completely insured, is very expensive, but it can be worth it. So we've had only one claim on our insurance, and that's when all our electronics on the boat got wiped out by a near lightning strike as we approached Hawaii, and an electromagnetic pulse rolled across the boat and just simply destroyed everything electronic in it. That was over $15,000 just to buy the new equipment, and I installed it myself. If we'd had to have someone install it, that would have probably cost an additional $4,000 or $5,000. So,
but the insurance company paid it all.
The insurance company paid every bit. They didn't complain, and they didn't cry. They said, "Send us the bill."
Okay,
and they paid 100% new for old with no self risk from our part. So that was pretty amazing. We got $16,000 worth of new electronics in reality for free, although it did cost me a lot of time to install it. But those are the things you say, "Oh, well, I'll never get hit by lightning." Well, you're right. Although we know 3 or 4 boats that have gotten hit by lightning, and we didn't even get hit. We just had a near miss. But that near miss was enough to throw a huge electromagnetic pulse through the boat and just destroy everything. Everything just died. So these are all expenses you have to think about. And you can choose not to insure the boat, and you take your chances. For us, I would say what we paid for insurance and what we've gotten out of that lightning strike, we're probably about break even for 5 years. So far, you can say we're a little bit ahead of the game.
We think like you that the insurance, many people say they can't afford the insurance, and we just say we can't afford not to have the insurance. Because we calculated if your premium is 3% of the boat value, which is a higher percentage, if you self-insured, you'd have to sail 30 years without any incident before you would amass the money to pay back the value of your boat. Now, I don't think too many people will be able to sail 30 years without incidents. Another thing to consider is costs over the reimbursement if you have some sort of accident or incident. We lost our first boat from a broken mooring in a marine park. The insurance not only paid the whole agreed value of the policy, but they also paid an additional $14,000, which was the cost to salvage and remove the boat to get the wreck out of the park. So we were able to get a new boat and start cruising again right away. If we had to pay all those costs, we'd probably still be working. Let's talk about fishing. Are you a good fisherman, or you're one of those that never seems to catch anything?
No, I take fishing pretty seriously. We carried 1 or 2 rods, and I spent a lot of money on lures, and sometimes Dee would say it would be cheaper to buy the fish than what I spent on lures. But overall, we did really well and took it seriously. Lots of mahi-mahi. Lots of, we caught big Spanish mackerel, 6-7 feet long, and all of that. In the Bahamas, it was very easy. In the Pacific, it was pretty good. When we got to Indonesia, we had just been there a short time, maybe a couple of days, and a fisherman came by one morning, and I don't know, I guess he was trying to sell me some fish, and I asked him how long. He had like 4 fish in his boat, and I asked him how long he'd been out, and he said all night. And I said, well, how long do you stay out? And he says, until I catch enough to feed my family. And so Indonesia was so fished out, I didn't fish at all because I felt every fish I caught, I was potentially taking food out of the mouth of some little child. So I think you need to really think about it and be responsible. I remember one boat, we were snorkeling for lobster and stuff in the Caribbean, and a guy caught a lobster that was too small and illegal, and he kept it, another boater, and then invited us over for dinner, and I said, I'm not taking part in that. We told him we were quite angry with him, and we thought it was very wrong what he was doing, and I think he was, he thought about it a little more later. But anyway, we took fishing quite seriously. But the first advice I got from a friend who was kind of a semi-pro fisherman on sport fishing boats, we usually use sort of colored squid and with different amounts of weights in them. And I had a number of them with differing amount of weight in the head. But the goal was to get the squid to bounce 2 or 3 times on the surface, and then maybe submerge for a little bit and then come back up to the surface and bounce a few more times. So that tends to be a combination of how much line you let out and what speed you're going and how much weight you have in the head of the lure. And I tied all my own lures with treble hooks and the rubber squid, and then, like I say, weight in the nose. And that was my method.
Okay, great. Let's hope that there are still some fish left out there in the sea. It's pretty amazing when you go to some of these markets here, like in Southeast Asia. You would think there was nothing left, but somehow in the fish markets you always see some fish, and some pretty big ones too. So let's hope that Mother Earth actually does keep pulling things out of her hat. So Vinny, do you and Karsten do a lot of fishing aboard Capri?
We had expected to go spearfishing, but we haven't done it because most places in Caribbean you are not allowed to use your spear gun. And in French Polynesia, most places you have the fish poison, the ciguatera. And we know that people do fish close by the island. Sometimes they ask the local people if it's safe to go fishing here, but still we heard that both the local and some of the sailors, they got the ciguatera. So actually, Carsten and I, we sold our spear gun when we came to Hawaii. So, but you can go fishing between the islands. We haven't done that much because if you caught a tuna fish, 65 kilos, we only 2 people, and what are we doing with all this meat? So, and it's very cheap buying the fish from the local people. So, so we support the local fishermen instead.
All right, lots of people have the quandary about how to protect their boat deck when they're doing some nasty or dirty or heavy projects. What kind of things do you use?
We have two ideas that we use extensively to help protect the boat from dings and scratches. One is we have several thin pieces of plywood or rubber pads, about 6 by 6 inches by 6 inches, that we lay down to protect the deck, especially when we're manhandling anchors or other heavy items. Another item, actually we have several of that we use extensively, are little, we call them utility tarps. They're about 3 feet by 4 feet. We have sewn in eyelets or webbing loops that won't scratch the boat, but yet we can use those to tie the tarp in place if we need to. They can protect the deck. They can protect us from sun, rain, or wind. We can wrap one around us if we need some temporary relief from the wind or the cold. More important, another important thing is we use them as drop cloths when we're painting. However, if you use umbrella, any drop paint will just soak right through it. So for painting, we recommend cotton duck drop cloths or utility tarps.
We cruisers may disagree about whether it's worth it to inshore or worth it to try and catch fish, but all of us agree that a cold sundowner at the end of the day is always worth it. And not all of us have room for those big clunky classic ice trays, so you have a solution for us, Bill?
Yeah, I've been doing this for a couple of decades now, and I've showed it to some other people while out cruising, and they're like, wow, that's going to change our cruising life. That's going to be terrific. We've always had to hunt down ice and buy it. And this is a solution for that. And what it is essentially is taking a Ziploc bag, filling it about 2/3 the way full, and zipping it closed and putting it in your freezer. Always hold the bag up and make sure it doesn't have a pinhole in it before you put it in the freezer. And then when you want to use ice or get ice, you take an ice pick. Now, guys, don't try and cheat here. Don't think about using a Phillips head screwdriver. Use an ice pick. It makes all the difference in the world. Buy an ice pick. And you take the bag and you stab the bag while the bag's still closed, and you break up the ice. And then when you're done getting a couple of cubes out for your cocktail, you zip the bag closed and put it back in the freezer. The other nice thing is that if you're going to somebody else's boat, you can take a bag out, stab it, break it all up, zip it back, put it in your little cooler with your tonic and your beverages. And then when you get to the other person's boat, you just simply open your Ziploc bag, get out some ice, and put it back in. So the idea of the ice pick too is that you're going to be able to reuse this bag until it's empty. So it keeps the integrity of the Ziploc bag. The other thing I'd say is don't use cheap imitation Ziploc bags. We use Ziploc freezer bags just because they're robust. And this will save you a lot of trouble and space in your freezer. One of these Ziploc bags, these are the quart-size bags, 2/3 full, equals about 2.5 ice cube trays. So it's deceiving. It makes a lot more ice than you think it would. So it's a great way to make ice on your boat and save room in your freezer.
Okay, now I'm a little confused. How can you stab your bag, and then as maybe you don't, you put it back in your cooler, but the ice still melts a little bit. How can you reuse that bag after you've poked holes in it?
Yeah, I didn't mean to say that you could reuse it by filling it with water again. You use it until it's empty, but you use it for ice until you've used all the ice up.
Okay.
When you're making your cocktails, you may only use 1/3 of the bag. So if you've used an ice pick to break up the ice, the bag still has its integrity to hold the ice. And
okay.
Put it back in the freezer.
Okay. I get it. Okay, so that's it. Were you blown away by this episode? Ha ha ha. Hope so. We thank you all for watching and hope you got some excitement living through a hurricane. Next episode? As technology and electronics become ever more prevalent on today's cruising boats, making and storing the energy to run them becomes ever more important also. So join us as we discuss energy management aboard in our next episode. Till then, keep clean wakes, cold sundowners, and flying burgees and swallowtails. So remember, fly your burgees and swallowtails and invite others to join SSCA to benefit from sharing knowledge, ideas, personal friendships, and getting access to all the great stuff we present in the Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Talk to you next time. We hope you enjoyed listening to our guests and took away some new ideas for yourselves. If you have something to say about any subject you heard, it's not too late to join in. Be sure to check out the preview of our next episode. Comment and subscribe on SSCA YouTube channel. Share this video on your social media. And join the camaraderie by participating in our coming new episodes. If you're not a member yet, visit ssca.org to get in on the conversation and gain full access to the SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit.